when all the pharma left Montreal, it was a very sad situation because where did the UDM, where did the Concordia, where did the McGill people go? Because these people were looking in the future and saying, oh, I can get a job at one of these pharma and make a good salary, right? What are they going to do? And so it was a very depressing situation, right? Because, what are you going to do? You're going to get a degree and then you're going to go to the United States. People in Montreal like to stay in Montreal, right? People in Paris like to stay in Paris. So what I wanted to do is start transferring the knowledge base that we had in Montreal for drug discovery to the younger generations. And that was the goal, start doing that transfer because, I'm 63 and these things take years to transfer. It's not, on the spot type of training. You have to go, you have to try, you have to fail, you have to gain, you have to observe, learn how to be a scientist, learn how to be a doctor, and then be one of the decision makers of the future, right? So it kind of snowballed into this type of a thing.
From laboccupier.com, this is NGBideas, a podcast about the personal journey of leaders in Canada's life sciences community. Hi, I'm Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Steven LaPlante, who is the founder of NMX Research and Solutions in Laval, Quebec. Steven is a senior biophysical medicinal chemist, an entrepreneur, and a professor with more than 25 years of experience in drug discovery in both the pharmaceutical industry and academia. Steven's work has contributed to the discovery of multiple hepatitis C drug candidates, and today he's focused on advancing new drug discovery platforms while helping train the next generation of scientists and biotech entrepreneurs. Before we get to our conversation with Steven, we'd like to let you know this podcast is part of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is a national networking event for Canada's life sciences community, and you can find details at nextgreatbigideas.com. This episode of NGBideas was recorded in November 2024. Steven LaPlante, welcome to NGBideas.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Absolutely been looking forward to our discussion. I read that your parents were originally from Quebec, but you were born in upstate New York.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So what happened there? Why did they leave Quebec?
Okay, there's a little story behind that. So my father and mother married young. They were in Valleyfield. My mother's Valleyfield, my father in Ormstown. But they grew up on farms, right? Small farm. There was no vehicle. They got around with the bull in a wagon. There was no heat, no electricity, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how my dad grew up. They ended up moving to Laval, where one of the metro sites is right now. That they bought a property. Then my father got tuberculosis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And he was sent up north for about 3 years. He had a lung removed, etc. Basically, was ready to die. Then there's a few things that happened. Antibiotics came along, and also vaccines came along. The person who brought the vaccines, who didn't invent them, but they brought them from France, etc., was a guy called Armand Frappier. So thank you to Armand Frappier. It just turns out that I'm working now as a professor at the Institut National de Recherche Scientifique, Centre Armand Frappier. So it's kind of cyclic here, let's say. Now, my father got tuberculosis. He was working at Hydro-Quebec right before. But then what happened is they did not give him his job back. And so he had to have a job. And so they sold their property for $600. Then they used that to go to United States for a job.
Wow.
And so,
and they ended up in, was it Messina?
Yeah, Messina, New York.
So that's just, I guess, on the south, basically the south shore of the St. Lawrence, just southwest of Cornwall, correct?
Yep.
So what happened there? And what did he end up doing for a living?
He basically was self-taught guy, right? So he taught himself electricity, construction. He started learning how to build houses, farms, and then he decided to go into farming only. And I wasn't born when he was doing the other stuff, but I was only there for the farming portion because we had originally had 10 kids in the family.
10 kids.
and I was the last one. So it was part of that Quebec Catholic thing where have as many children as you can, prosper, etc. Put in your 15% of your salary, and we're all okay, type of thing, right? But and my dad, they had 16, and then my mother's side, they had 11. So
Wow.
these were all big families, right? So, anyways, we have a lot of cousins.
So in your family, what's the age difference between you and your oldest sibling?
11.
11 years.
Yeah. So my mother
So,
was pregnant the whole time, let's say.
oh my goodness. And
So
I hope that your siblings and your parents are still with us.
my parents are not. My siblings are. There's a couple that have passed away, but they're all in northern New York State still. I'm the only one that jumped back across.
Okay.
So, but to go back to your question, what did my dad do? Well, he was farming, right? And so this is how I grew up as a farmer. And so we basically built all of our tools, because we were poor farmers. We didn't have money to go and buy anything at the store, especially tools. Everything had to be built and designed, et cetera. So we had a welder and a torch, et cetera. So we could cut and weld tools and build our own stuff. And so this is where I learned how to build my own tools. And this is what I brought into my current careers, basically.
So was the farm livestock or was it crops or a combination?
Milking cows.
Okay.
Yeah. Dairy farm.
And sorry, what were your parents' names?
My father is Lucien and my mother Juliette.
Do you know how they met?
I don't know how they met, but I know that my father was after her for a while. Finally, he it was it was interesting because before he died, he started going a bit senile because he was 94, but he was just it was right before he passed away. But he said he kept on repeating, "I got the girl." And so I didn't understand what he was talking about, and I was kind of nervous. Like, what do you mean you got the girl? I grabbed the photo of my mother, and he goes, "Yeah, that's her."
Isn't that great? So he was a very hardworking man and very inventive, and you inherited those traits. What was your mother like?
Basically, with all those kids, she was at the house, and she maintained everything at the house. My mother worked hard all the time, that's for sure. Very nice lady, mom. Maman in French, you call it maman and papa. But she had to maintain and make sure that everything was okay. So in other words, we woke up at 5:30 in the morning, and then the breakfast was on the table. And then directly after, we went to work. And then when it came down to lunch, we came in and lunch was on the table. Then we went back to work again, and then supper had to be on the table by 7:30ish. And so basically we kept on going. We had to, we needed our energy to be able to work. And my mother was there with, in making sure that happened.
And this was in the 1960s?
This was actually in the 70s and in early, in the 70s and early.
Okay. And
sorry.
so you were getting up so you were getting up early and literally having to go out and feed the cows and whatnot as a kid.
Shovel manure. Lots of shoveling manure. For example, like in the summertime, we'd wake up, right? We'd go to the farm and get on a horse and go get the cows in the field with the horse and bring them, milk them, and then feed them, et cetera, et cetera. And then that would be the beginning of the day. So that was the beginning of my day. Get on the horse.
Wow. Now, did you also work in the woods, or was it just on the farm? Or?
No, actually, it depends on the seasons, right? So in the winter time, what we'd have to do is we'd have to get firewood, right? Cut trees for firewood, but we also built our own houses. So we would cut pine trees, large pine trees, take all the branches off, burn them right there, because it was in the winter, so we could burn them, and then get them ready so that in the spring we could bring them over to be put into planks. So Messina is really close to the Amish people and also other farmers, right? And so what we would do is we would get the logs, bring them via vehicles, and then chop them into 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, etc. Not chop them, saw them, right? And then take those back, and then we would have our wood for building houses.
Now, growing up with all of that work to be done every day, did it leave an impression that, maybe I should go out and get an education? Or obviously it gave you a great grounding, but did it help point you down a path?
Yeah, actually, what happened is, like, we were milking about 115 cows, and then but we also raised the young animals too, right? So we would have the calves and heifers. Heifers are in between calves and cows, let's say. But we had another 100, so at least 200 animals, plus the pigs, plus the chickens, et cetera, right? But there were a lot of diseases. You saw, things happened, right? So you're having to take care of the animals, and it really was unfortunate because, I mean, pink eye existed, right? So then how do you treat them? But that's not too bad, pink eye, but it's highly contagious, etc. But there was one particular disease that was really ugly, right? So when cows would have their calves, all the inners would come out and the cow would end up dying, basically, right? And it was basically a bacteria. It ended up being, and we didn't know what it was, right? And so, but it ended up being a bacteria that was treatable. And so I started getting interested in veterinarian medicine. And so that was an area that I wanted to. And so I figured that's what I want to do in the future. So, and you got to remember when you're shoveling manure, right? And sometimes, if you'd go where there's a pile or whatever, but you'd be there for hours and hours and hours. And so what do you do when you're shoveling manure? The brain thinks, right? You go through things, right? And so this is where I could plan it all out.
So thinking, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So where did you go to elementary school? Was it in the town of Messina, or was it in the fields nearby?
No, it was it's the town of Messina. It was
Okay.
about 4 miles away.
Okay. And big school, a lot of students, or?
Yeah, there were a bunch of students because it kind of assembled people from a wider region. You got to remember, for Canada, everybody moves to the border area, right? For US, why would they want to go to the border? So there's not a whole lot of towns in northern New York State. So
Okay.
really, they would really ship people in from far for school. And so there was about 2,000 students in that school at that time.
Oh, that's a big school.
Yeah.
So were you a gregarious kid and a good student, or did you kind of stay behind the scenes
I very rarely spoke.
because you were shy, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Very
Okay.
much. And so what I did is, if I was going to plan a future, then I needed an education. So I focused all my energies on education. For example, you come home at 7:30 after chores, eat, you have to take a shower because, of course, you stink, etc. And by that time, there doesn't leave a whole lot of time if we're going to be going to school the next day. Homework had to happen. So it was really go, go, go all the time, right? Do the homework, etc. And so I tried to excel as much as I could at school.
Did marks come easily to you?
I don't know if it came easily. I studied a lot.
So you were hyper focused on education, not sports or anything like that.
We were allowed one sport, wrestling.
Okay. And at the state level, or how did you do?
I did okay. I wasn't that great, but put it this way, like, imagine if you're working all day long. We didn't take breaks. That didn't exist, right? It was always hurry, get to the next thing, so we can do, go to the next job or project, etc. But I was pretty strong at that point. I was still pretty small, but strong, right? And so with that was a good attribute in wrestling.
So you were one of those kids that didn't say much, but your actions spoke for themselves.
Yes.
Okay. So I've been told that people who grow up on a farm look at animals differently. Would you agree with that?
I do.
What's the difference?
I have friends, animal friends, right? Like, I had a special relationship with my dog because the dog would always be our helper. We worked together, right? Assembling cows, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the cows were really nice and kind, right? They like to be rubbed behind it. And then sometimes when you're walking by a certain area hundreds of times a day, you always, pet one cow on the way in, on the way by, right?
Right.
I used to have a chicken who used to follow me around all the time, right?
That's great.
And so until one day, it's like, where's Redhead? It turns out that she got stepped on at one point. I found her
Oh,
manure
that's
at
too
one
bad.
point, but then we had Tocat. Tocat was always following us around too, right? Except that she got like a cancer on one of her toes, so that's why we
Hmm.
called her Tocat. And so one day she couldn't walk, right? She couldn't walk anymore. So basically took a knife and cut it off. And then Tocat was happy after because now she could live, she could walk. So yeah, there's special relationships that you can have
Huh.
with animals.
So you finished high school and you went to university. Where did you go to university for your undergrad?
Okay, that was at State University of New York in Potsdam, New York. I think there's about 6,000 students that went there.
Okay.
And it was an interesting period because computers had just started out at that point. They just started out. We still got programmed by punch cards.
I remember those. IBM System 36.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. So was there a bit of a culture shock going from the farm to university? Did you have difficulty with that transition?
I don't think I had difficulty, but it was a shock, multiple shocks, right? So when I went, I brought a small suitcase with a pair of pants and a couple shirts and socks, etc. And then when I got to the university, I saw some kids were bringing stereo systems, et cetera, et cetera. And all I had was my clothes, like some clothes. I didn't really know what to expect or even to sleep over, right? So then, and I remember the first night that I slept at the university, I woke up in the morning at 6 and everybody was sleeping. And I was like, okay, now what do I do? And so the next day I said, wow, I can sleep in.
Ah,
So I slept until 8 o'clock. And that was
that
amazing.
you mentioned earlier that your family was, well, not poor, but there wasn't a lot of wealth. How were you able to afford to go to school?
Yeah, my parents did not contribute financially. I got scholarships because my grades were good. So I was able to get some scholarships. That's what would help me do that. And then when I was in the university, I also had jobs. I took on washing dishes in the cafeteria, stuff like that. So I was able to do that, make it happen myself.
Hi, it's Jim. When we come back, Steven talks about the path that took him from a hardworking farm upbringing in northern upstate New York to university studies in chemistry and biology and the early ambition that set the direction for the path he's followed. Stay with us. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. Hi, Jim here. We'd like to take a moment to ask a quick favor. The goal of this show and our other podcasts is to promote Canada's life sciences community, and we hope you like what we're doing. If you do, please tell your friends about us. We will greatly appreciate you promoting us on social with the hashtags NGBI, NGBideas, and NGBI Summit. We really appreciate your support, and thank you so much for listening. Let's get back to our conversation. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Steven LaPlante from NMX Research and Solutions in Laval, Quebec. So your degree was in chemistry and biology, and I'm guessing that you wanted to finish your undergraduate as fast as possible and get on to the next step. Did you have in your mind that, okay, I'm going to be an academic, or is that something that you just kind of serendipitously fell into?
Okay, so when you're on a farm, you're your own boss. Now, what I wanted is to be my own boss to some degree. So I figured the best way to do that would be a prof.
Okay.
And so that had become my goal, to basically go as far as I could, as fast as I could. And the fast was not exactly true. It was more important, the content that I was learning, more than speed. So so that was my goal, was to just go as far as I could. And so it was weird because I was taking around 23 to 25 credits a semester.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. I mean, like some of the students here, undergraduates, they're taking 15, 16, 17 or something like that. I figured, look, if I paid this amount and we have unlimited credits that we can take, I'm just going to take as many credits as I could and learn as much as I could.
So why the focus on chemistry and biology? Who planted that seed?
I wanted to be a vet. And so to get into vet school, you needed to really have excellent, and it's really hard to get into vet school. And so I wanted to really get great grades, etc. And so that's why the chemistry and biology.
Okay, but you didn't go to veterinarian school.
I did not get accepted.
Okay, so it's not that you didn't want to, it's that you didn't get accepted.
Right. Yeah. I applied to Cornell and basically they rejected me.
So plan B, was there a plan B or is it something that you cobbled together?
The plan B ended up being just continuing to graduate school. What I ended up finding out towards the end of undergraduate, that you don't actually pay to go to graduate school. You get teaching, research stipends or teaching stipends where you can teach other students, etc. And so I thought that was great. Now I can actually not make money, but I can get it all paid for. And so that was a very nice aspect that I did not know when I was an earlier undergraduate.
Okay. So did you go straight into the PhD program or? Okay. And I understand that at one point, I guess it was a supervisor who pulled you aside and basically read you the Riot Act. What happened there?
No, I don't know what you mean by the Riot Act. Sorry.
Well, he basically said, if I understand correctly, that your grades are not what they need to be.
No, I never. I've never spoke to anybody about it. I just did it myself.
So you had that talk with yourself?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
When you're an undergraduate, you have a lot of posters, right? On poster boards, and they all say, "Come do graduate studies over at our place. Come over to our university," right? And so I thought, well, okay, fine. That sounds good, right?
So you went to the University of Syracuse to pursue your PhD, and that again was in biophysics?
Yes, biophysics.
Okay, I don't have a science background. What is biophysics?
It's a mixture of chemistry, biology, and physics. Because see, what happens on universities, you have the chemistry department, or you have the biology department, and you have a physics department, right? And these people, when you're doing research or even education, it becomes very narrow. You go deep into each topic, but it's narrow. And so biophysics it had just started this program. I was one of the first to be in that program, right? And they said, okay, why don't we take classes from each of these fields and call it a biophysics degree.
And so you were virtual guinea pig in the program, and it didn't dissuade you from pursuing an academic career, obviously.
True. Yeah.
So you graduated with your PhD from Syracuse in 1988?
88.
Okay. And you did a postdoc at École Polytechnique in Montreal the following year.
Sorry. It was not École Polytechnique in Montreal. It was École Polytechnique in France.
I beg your pardon. Right.
Yeah. So I applied and I got a scholarship to do a postdoc in the Paris area. And so I was there for a couple of years.
And it was self-interest or was it the program that attracted you or the fact that it was in France?
It was because it was in France.
Okay.
You got to remember, so I grew up in U.S. My parents, they didn't speak English when they moved there. And so they always spoke to us in French, and then we always responded in English. See, the way it works in the U.S. at that time particularly is that you'd have immigrants that come, and they have their language. They teach their children the language. The children already start losing the language. And basically in school, it was like, you're in the United States, you speak English, right? It was frowned upon to speak another language. And so then our children, they have no capability in that language after that. So by the first generation, it's a half gone. The next generation, it's gone.
Okay.
And so I wanted to go to France that's where my parents came from, right? Originally, right? I mean, all the French Quebecers came from France, right? So I wanted to go see what that was all about.
And you had a great 2 years. You came back, and I'd like to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was around this time in particular where MNR spectroscopy was kind of exploding in interest because there'd been significant developments in resolution and sensitivity. Is that correct?
Yes, some people in Switzerland had made some good discoveries about how to determine the structure of a protein by NMR.
And that attracted you.
That did attract me quite a bit, actually. You got to imagine to see a protein like that. If you look in a microscope, a microscope doesn't exist where you could see those proteins. You need higher specialized tools to do that. X-ray crystallography or NMR spectroscopy. And now there's a thing called cryo-EM that's also coming up, but that's a recent accomplishment. Yeah, so I got interested in that portion.
And what about it was fascinating to you?
Okay, so the fascination in the first place was not necessarily proteins, but DNA. I had been fascinated with DNA since the 7th grade. And so you could determine the structure of not just proteins, but also DNA and of course RNA. Now you got to remember recently the vaccines for COVID, those are RNA based. I ended up after 2 years in as a postdoc, I got a permanent job with the government with Centre National de Recherche.
So is this in France or in Quebec?
In France. So I got a job and I started working there. I was working there for about a year. Then my mother had a heart attack. And she needed help and guidance. So I figured, okay, I'm going to go move close to my mother and take care of her while I have a chance while she was alive still. And so what I did is I looked for the closest job, and the closest place was Montreal. There's no large city around Messina, right? So there's no way they're going to have NMR spectroscopy and other tools like that. So I moved to Montreal to take care of my mom, which was about a 2-hour ride. So then I ended up buying a piece of property and take care of my mom. She ended up living another 10 years.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great, actually.
So you came back and then you did get on with Boehringer Ingelheim.
I applied to University of Montreal for a job to be a prof first.
Oh, okay.
And they rejected me.
So you left the academic sector and went into the private sector, and your focus was on spectroscopy, correct?
Correct.
You were there for quite some time.
23 years. Yeah. All in drug design. I remember when I first came, the guy, the boss at that time said, I don't know what you do or what you can do, but just do what you do. and here's an NMR. And so basically it was all, how do you do drug discovery? And so what I did is I started working with people, seeing what their problems are, what's going on, and then trying to solve their problems.
Were you running a lab at the company and had a team underneath you?
There was not a team. We were a small company. We're about 150 people. And these covered a very wide disciplines, right? And so NMR spectroscopy, there were 3 of us at that point. It ended up being 3. So it was not a big team, no. But the whole idea was how do we design tools to be able to solve some of the issues that are people having with how do you design drugs?
Right. So you started there in March of 1991, and Montreal in the 1980s and 90s had grown into the pharmaceutical center in Canada, and like it was firing on all cylinders. What was it like working in that environment at that time?
Okay, Montreal was the world hub for drug discovery of small molecules. It was, if you were pharma, you were doing some R&D, research and development in Montreal. And so that's the environment that I came into, right? But what happened is that particular company I was at, Boehringer Ingelheim, the way that they managed people was very different from today. That's for sure. The way that they managed people, it was very strict. So there were 4 walls. You stayed in the 4 walls. I didn't get a chance to get to know people in the Montreal area. I met people, of course, at some point, but even if it was to go to a seminar over at the university, no.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was extremely strict. However, it was also highly multidisciplinary too. So basically learned a lot. And you got to remember at that time, it was more prestigious to be hired at a pharma than to go to a university as a prof. And
Really?
it was because the brains ended up going to pharma. They were attracted to pharma. I'm not saying they didn't go to the universities too, but it was more prestigious to go to the pharma.
Now, at the same time, unfortunately, there were some government decisions which started to, I guess, form some cracks in the foundation of that community. And I think one of them was the price structure for drugs. And there were some other things that just kind of set the community up for failure, unfortunately.
Yeah, like patents, changes in the patent laws, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. Quebec was really, they did a really good job of attracting pharma, right? And then after that, maintaining the farm here because it made a lot of money for the province. Absolutely, right? All the, the direct employment, but also the indirect employment and all the indirect benefits, right? And when that happened, it was terrible, right? It was terrible because pharma was leaving. But they wanted to go to Boston, Los Angeles, Shanghai. This is when it started to be very attractive to go to China too. And so they just changed the way they managed research and development. And then now all of pharma have left the Montreal area. There used to be a lot. Now there's none doing small molecule research and development. There's still some clinical trial things that are going on in other aspects, right? But what we had in terms of that particular R&D is
Yeah. And on the private sector side, at the same time that the government was setting everything up for failure, there was also, I think, a corporate shift in focus from R&D to mergers and acquisitions because the cost of drug discovery was so great. And they thought, we don't have to spend $2.5 billion to develop a novel therapeutic. We'll go buy somebody for $1 billion who's already done it.
Yeah, it's true that there was a bunch of things that were shifting all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
That was happening. A lot of mergers and acquisitions. Asia started looking very, very attractive. The labor was much cheaper than here in North America. And so all these things started kind of coming together. Biotechs had started also. Why do all this discovery stuff in-house if you can just pick off some of the compounds that were being designed by these little biotechs?
Yeah, at a fraction of the cost.
At a fraction of the cost.
So when did you see the writing on the wall?
Okay, of course we could see the writing on the wall, but I was doing well. I liked my check coming in every 2 weeks, and I was learning a lot still. So I stayed right until Boehringer Ingelheim closed the doors. And they closed the doors in 2013.
Okay. And was that a surprise when it happened?
No, it was not a surprise.
Okay. So 2013, you find yourself on the sidewalk, and there were a lot of changes happening in Montreal. And if I have my facts correct, you became an adjunct professor at the University of Quebec, and you were there for about 12 months. Is that, did I get that right?
Okay, so I did apply and I got rejected from UDM again, University of Montreal. I also applied at INRS. I was rejected. And I then tried to find a job using NMR spectroscopy, and there were no jobs. Basically because all the other pharma had laid off people too. And so we were at the tail end of the laying offs. And so there were very few jobs. I did not want to move. I mean, I wanted to keep my family here in Montreal. I think to be honest, I think Quebec is one of the best places in the world to live.
I would agree with that. 100%. Yeah.
And it's like, why would I don't want to go to Boston. I had experiences in US cities that I was really not happy about. You walk down the wrong street and all of a sudden you're in a bad neighborhood, right? We don't really have that here in Quebec so much, right? It's very different in that sense. I mean, we have healthcare, right? We have a lot. We get taxed a lot, but there's a cost to being well too, right? And being comfortable in your environment. Anyways, all that to say that there were no jobs. The ones I did apply for to try to get to be a professor, I got turned down. And so I said, I'm going to start a company.
Out of necessity.
Yes, out of necessity.
So I guess you started driving from Montreal down to Boston on a pretty frequent basis at this time. True?
Yeah. Every other week I was living in Boston. So I would drive to Boston on the weekend, like on a Sunday, work until Friday night, and then Friday night drive back, and then stay 1 week in Montreal trying to build the business, but build a website, all these other things, but also get the business started, right? And so I was living in Boston 1 week and living in Montreal for 1 week.
Hi, it's Jim again. When we come back, Steven reflects on a major turning point in his life when the collapse of Montreal's pharmaceutical sector forced him to rethink his career and build something of his own. Stay with us. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas, Canada's life sciences podcast. The goal of this podcast is to help promote Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is an independently organized, not-for-profit fundraising event in support of McMaster Children's Hospital, and if you're not aware, Mac Kids is also one of the top critical care pediatric hospitals in Canada. To learn more about the life-saving work done by the team at Mac Kids every day, please go to hamiltonhealthsciences.ca/McMaster-Children's-Hospital. Now you know our why. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to NGBideas. I'm Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Steven LaPlante, who's the founder of NMX Research and Solutions in Laval, Quebec. And you were married at this time, correct? So can we talk about your family?
Yeah, actually. Well, you can imagine the kids growing up in that type of environment, right? I mean, when I was at Beringer, like I said, I liked to have that check coming in every 2 weeks. That was really nice. I was learning a lot. And I also was doing a lot of renovations on the house.
You were home for dinner?
Yeah, exactly, right. And things were really well. And then in addition to that, my kids were going to school. We're trying to get them into, because there's always the language thing, right? So we put them in French school so that they could really learn French. At the time, my wife was from Peru, so she spoke English, Spanish.
Sorry, what's her name?
Monica.
Okay. If I may, how did you meet Monica?
Through a work friend.
Okay.
Through a work friend here in Montreal.
Okay. And you've got 3 kids?
Yeah, I got 3 kids.
These girls?
2 girls and a boy.
Okay.
And basically they speak Spanish, French, and English, right? So they're really lucky. So
where did they pick up the Spanish? Just at school?
No. That was at home. So we made an agreement where I would only speak to my kids in English. Monica would only speak in Spanish, and then they would get the French from school.
Wow. Is Spanish her first language?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so my kids speak 3 languages, right? They can read and write and speak 3 languages. So it's a huge advantage, right? Again, this is part of living in Montreal, right? You get a lot of immigrants that have that, right? They have their original language, then they learn English and French. And so this is one of the beauties of Montreal.
Yeah. So you've got this startup, NMX, and you're traveling back and forth to Boston. You're trying to help raise a family. Down in Boston, you were with Harvard Medical School?
Yeah. So what happened is there's a technique in drug discovery called fragment-based lead discovery or fragment-based drug discovery, right? And it was an interesting method, but there was a lot of issues with it. There were a lot of problems, and some people did not like it because of those problems. And so what happened is I was hired as a consultant at Harvard Medical School to teach them about NMR spectroscopy and fragment-based lead discovery and drug discovery. And so, and so even today, let's say it was 12 years ago, right? So 12 years ago, I'm still a consultant there. So every time I go to Boston now, I still go there. We meet up and we design next steps. So what I did is I decided that as a company, I would take this methodology and just start from scratch. So Like if you can imagine a bench, right? Cleared the bench and start everything from scratch. And so like everything. And that way, if I start everything from scratch, I would solve some of those problems that they had. And that way I would have a method that would be mine.
Huh.
And so I took a lot of that methodology from the farm in terms of building your own tools. And while I was at Beringer Ingelheim, I also built my own tools. And so I kind of brought that all into the company.
So how did you sorry, you were also is it the Broad Institute in Boston?
Yes. I was at the Broad Institute. The Broad Institute is the drug discovery entity of Harvard and MIT.
And how did you end up getting connected with that organization and Harvard Medical School?
Okay, so at Harvard, it was an NMR facility, right? And so they needed to learn how to do new applications for NMR. So that's how I got into the Harvard Medical School part. And
so did they call you, or did you apply for a position?
Yeah. It was sort of a mix of both. I let them know that I was available. And then they said, okay, well, let's, we want to know more about fragment-based lead discovery in NMR.
Okay.
And then we just started interacting, and then it was like, okay, well, then I said, I can't do this for free. And so then there's some monies that came, right, to help pay for my expenses, travel expenses, etc. I made a website. I learned how to make a website. So I made a website, and then the Broad Institute called me up and said, we'd like you to come over and talk to us, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the utility of having a website, right?
Huh.
And then things just kind of built up from there. But what was really cool was that because I started everything from scratch, then what I was doing was good quality, and it can be done fast. So it was amazing. My first project was at the Broad, and basically did things, let's say, compared to another company that was out there called Beryllium at the time. If you wanted them to do something, it was a 1-year wait. And basically, I had completed the project within a month. Basically, that's the advantage of when you know what you're doing. And I've been building this system, right? And then word of mouth went around, right? Oh yeah. If you want to do FBDD or FBLD,
you're going to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
Huh.
And so up until now, it's been all word of mouth, right? For clients.
Wow.
We're starting to advertise now, because we're trying to grow now too.
Right. We're going to talk about your company in a moment, but I read that when your kids were quite young, you wanted to help them in science. And when I was a kid, I had a chemistry class, and I'm sure I tried to blow up the house a couple of times. You ended up volunteering at their school.
Yeah. So at their elementary school, there was no science. And so it was a bit of a disappointment, right? If you want to teach your kids something, you teach them as young as possible, start as young as possible. So I volunteered. And so I would go in and teach the classes, because there were 2 different classes, right? So I would teach their classes, not just them, but their classes, right? And just start some science education, very simple concepts. But it was pretty cool, actually, because I talked to them about pollution, simple aspects of pH, how to measure pHs, how to use pipettes, little tools that they could play and enjoy. And when you do when you check your pH in your pool, et cetera, or whatever, you use the litmus paper, right? So the color changed. And then you have a scale. How do you measure it? And you say, oh, that's at 7. Then what does an acid do? What does a base do? Right? Stuff like that, like a lot of basic concepts. But when you're teaching elementary, we're talking about kindergarten, but also 1st to 6th, right? You have to keep their attention. And that I was not used to, right? How to manage a class. But it was really tricky, right? Because I had to prepare for these classes. I had to get all the tools ready, because you're not going to sit there and, say, well, now what am I going to do? Right. You really had to be on the ball. And so
it's probably a tougher audience than the boardrooms that you were going into.
It was, because their attention span is lower, right? So you really have to keep it up. And it was actually very fun. It was. And I would teach them basic concepts, and then after that, bring some real life issues in there and get their opinion on it, right? So pollution, we talked about, cars, cars and exhaust systems and that causing pollution. But how are we going to solve this in the future? How do we purify water? So in Laval, there's an épuration place where they purify water, etc. And what was really cool is that I was a part of the American Chemical Society, and I would apply for money, and then I would have money, and we could take the kids to these different places also, like the science museum. We went to the science museum. We went to these other, like even Armand Frappier Museum, and so then they would learn new things. They would have microscopes, etc. Anyways, it was very interesting.
And where did you find the time?
Okay, I worked day and night.
It sounds like it.
So what would happen is I would take some of the time off work, but then I would make up for it in the evening. So so that's what I had to do.
So you had this startup in Laval?
Yeah.
And were you bootstrapping it to the gates, or did you have financiers?
Bootstrap. It's still bootstrapping.
And how many people were on the team day one? Was it like a one-man operation?
It was I was one. But now we're 11 years later, we're 20.
Okay. So your business started to grow just organically and through word of mouth, and you've carved out a really interesting niche.
It is very interesting. Yes.
Could you tell us about it?
Okay. So I was bringing two things up about the same period of time, because after 1 year of the company, I also applied for a university position, and it was accepted finally. So what ended up happening is that to do drug discovery design, you need a lot of tools, and we did not have the tools. We didn't have the methods, et cetera, et cetera. So they had to be developed. They always have to be built. And so what I did is the company was doing the designing of the tools also, but then in the academic lab, I turned that into people learning how to earn their PhDs and their master's degree in building tools for drug discovery too. And so started combining drug discovery, building of tools, and then applying it to biotechs over into the Boston and Los Angeles areas. Right? But it's all actually very interesting, because there's multiple roles I was trying to build in at the same time. When all the pharma left Montreal, it was a very sad situation, because where did the UDM, where did the Concordia, where did the McGill people go? Because these people were looking in the future and saying, oh, I can get a job at one of these pharma and make a good salary, right? What are they going to do? And so it was a very depressing situation, right? Because, what are you going to do? You're going to get a degree and then you're going to go to the United States? People in Montreal like to stay in Montreal, right? People in Paris like to stay in Paris. So what I wanted to do is start transferring the knowledge base that we had in Montreal for drug discovery to the younger generations. And that was the goal. Start doing that transfer, because, I'm 63, right? And these things take years to transfer. It's not, on the spot type of training. You have to go, you have to try, you have to fail, you have to, gain, you have to observe, learn how to be a scientist, learn how to be a doctor, and then be one of the decision makers of the future, right? So it kind of snowballed into this type of a thing, right? Where, so we started building platforms at the university, and then now we use that platform for outside companies, et cetera. And so my goal really is all about how do you do drug discovery? How do you teach people drug discovery in something that people will use, not just it's possible that this could then lead to drug. No, let's build the drugs. Let's make sure that you build something that's going to be used and it will have the impact and it will have the end result, right? So, and then the thing is, it's like that FBLD, that fragment-based methodology, it's all about starting things from scratch. Somebody's got to start drug discovery from scratch, right? Well, that's what we do. We started purely from scratch, from the beginning, right? Somebody has to have the beginning ideas and moving it forward. And so if you can do that, then maybe you can actually spawn other biotechs here in the Montreal area and support biotechs in the Montreal area. So this is the direction we're moving forward in, is how do I don't know what the word, invigorate? How do you shake things up so that Montreal area starts really getting big into drug discovery again? But it won't be pharma, it'll be biotechs.
Right.
In biotechs that do drug discovery, but also contract research organizations, CROs, that serve the Boston and the Los Angeles pharma in Europe, right? And so the idea is that we know that there's still a lot of talent here in Montreal. And so what we've done is we've hired some of these people who have years and years of experience in pharma, bring them in, and then they also start transferring the expertise. And so you can see where it's a nice situation, right? And it's not too late, right? We need to keep moving this forward, because PhD will take at least 4 years. Right?
One of our previous guests on this podcast is Josh Patel from Molecular Forecaster. I think he's a mutual acquaintance.
Yes.
Did I just read that you've done a joint venture with Molecular Forecaster?
Yes, we have a partnership, because we do, let's call, we say experimental drug discovery, where we work with the molecules, we make the molecules, we test them, etc. He'll do more computational virtual design.
Right.
And so you need multiple disciplines to do this. So you need computational chemists, you need crystallographers, you need medicinal chemists to make the compounds, you need NMR spectroscopists to do the biophysics. I mean, you need pharmacologists. And so Josh, he's really good at the computer-aided drug discovery, CAD aspect. And so, yeah, we buddied up with him, because we can't do everything. We do cover a wide variety of topics, but we can't do everything. And so what we're learning how to do is build basically a series of partnerships. So I'm calling it the Drug Discovery Network, the DDN. And so what we do is we bring in specialists, companies or academia, but they all have to respect various criteria. They have to be really good at what they do. They have to be, among the top of what they do. They have to do things on time. Because this is a big issue with academia. So yeah, we'll get to it. Yeah. We'll do it. That interests me, but then after that, the results come way too late. Pharma is, everything's, you're doing teamwork. And so if you don't do your job, that means the other people can't get to what they need to do, et cetera. So it has to be timed. And so, so there's a bunch of criteria to be part of that drug discovery network.
Hi, it's Jim. When we come back, Steven explains how his company has grown into a specialized drug discovery platform, why collaboration is essential in this field, and how he is working to help rebuild drug discovery capacity in Montreal. Stay with us. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. If you're a new listener, we would like you to know this podcast is part of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is an independently organized, not-for-profit national networking event for the Canadian life sciences community, and we invite you to join us. For details on tickets and sponsorship, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. Now, is that network pan-Canadian, or is it reserved for Quebec companies?
No, it's not reserved for Quebec companies. It's for companies around the world.
Okay.
But it's based here.
Good.
Yeah, this is what we want. So Montreal is actually improving in terms of this biotech network and just biotech in general. I'm saying it really is working out well, but it's taking time. But things are changing very fast right now. The industry, the biotech industry is changing fast. I'll give you a quick example. If you're an investor in the United States, what'll happen is you say, okay, well, I'm going to invest my money into a biotech for drug discovery. But if you're nervous and you don't know if your biotechs are going to exist or how your money is going to be invested and move forward, you just stop, because you need to be confident that your money is going to be successful in, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, et cetera, right? So with the tariffs and all the uncertainty that's happening in the US, the investors are pulling back. Well, the biotechs don't have the money. If the biotechs don't have money, the contract research organizations can't satisfy what they need. And so there's a lot of changes that are happening right now. And so we need to adapt. And that's true for the whole country, right? I mean, this is true for all of us. And I'm only speaking about the biotech aspect.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of uncertainty south of the border right now. And my hope is that federal and provincial governments are going to band together and say, look, if you're unsure whether you have a job next week, come here, and repatriate every Canadian who has had to go south in the last 30 years to get a job. In my perfect world.
Can I just comment on one thing about that? We got to remember, I came to Quebec, right? There's two things that really hit me fast. One is I had gotten here in 91 and there were some taxes that were new taxes. And people were like, new tax, that sucks, right? If it was in the US, people would be like, there would be a storm, right? No,
Right.
we don't want that tax. So just the mentality of people is much more calm, right? And now with this new changes that are happening in the US, it's nice to see people standing strong and saying, hey, this is our country. We, standing up for ourselves, right?
Elbows up.
That's one nice thing. The other thing and it's really important is I couldn't believe how we behave as a colony.
What do you mean by that?
We have raw materials. We go and mine raw materials. We send that off. Then we
have to buy it back.
Then we have to buy the products back. I thought, well, isn't this crazy? And why doesn't the government why don't we get out of this colony thing? Right? Because we're still behaving as a colony. But if you've got the raw materials, you can process it and make a lot more money after that too.
Yeah.
So why not put money into that? Canada would be super strong after that because you've got the raw materials.
Yeah. It appears to me that we are so focused on managing wealth instead of creating it that we're just missing so many boats. And I hope that the life sciences industry, which I see poised to be the next industrial revolution, is something that we attach our wagon to. Like, there's so many great things happening from coast to coast, but that's another conversation. You've been doing this now for more than a couple of months and like decades. And one of the questions that I've asked previous guests, and if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you is, have you ever found yourself in a situation personally or professionally where the walls were closing in and you weren't sure you were going to get out of that situation? And if so, what did you learn from it?
I think I already described that situation, right? Where we lost a job and there were no jobs here for me.
Yeah.
And so I think that, having that opportunity to create my own employment was the way out of it. And I'm happy I did that.
And was that journey one that you expected? I mean, the difficulties and the time that it took.
No, I didn't expect it, and I had not planned for it in the past, right? Once I started down that journey, it's like going swimming, right? If you didn't know how to swim, it's either you sink or swim, right? And I think that's business, right?
Right.
Things happen, things change, and you have to learn how to adapt on that. And how do you manage people? Even that's not, especially then COVID hits, right? Wow. That was how do you do business when there is no business, right? So what we did is we worked on COVID. We have a patent some compounds for COVID, actually. So that we did drug discovery on COVID.
Thank you for that. Another question that I should probably ask more often, and I don't. So I would like to ask you is, if you could turn the clock back to, your undergraduate degree years and say, you know what, here's the advice that you need to know, or here's the course that you should have taken, what advice would you give yourself?
Okay, let me think a little bit about that. I think the courses that I would take are more programming.
Programming? Like computer programming?
Yeah. Because I think that what happens is that as we move forward, our use of computers, whether they're handheld or whatever, the more that you know about them, I think is really valuable. And then how do you use computers to do what you need to do? So even building up your own budget, right? If you want to have plan a budget, well, you've got to learn about Excel, and then you want to put in your equations and I mean, even something at that level, right? But then what about at higher levels, right? Planning, using computers to plan things or even to build tools. So for me, I would have liked that as a deeper method to build your own tools.
When I was doing some research for our conversation today, I saw some references to creativity. And I'd like to touch on that because research and development and running a business takes a degree of creativity. And I think it's a mindset. And I'm wondering if you think it's something that can be taught.
It's really weird because I asked this question a lot. So I thought about it a lot too. And I don't know if there's an answer to the question. Okay. Seriously, because creativity is very, very important. And you have different levels in different people, right? Some people, you look at them and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe they can think this, right? Or even come up with this. And then the other people, it's like, Jesus, there's no creativity at all there. Right? And I'm a professor, right? And so I need to ask that question because I get different types of people in my lab. And how do you teach creativity? And can you? Because first of all, you have to know, can you? Yes or no? If you can't, then maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should be focusing on different attributes for that student, right?
Right.
But if you can, then of course that would be worthwhile. So I think you can. I think there are certain limits, but where's the source of creating creativity? And it seems to me that the key is curiosity. If you're not curious, you're not going to look. But if you look and if you're curious, then you'll see potential creative ideas with that. And so I think that's the angle I'm trying. I'm trying to create curiosity. And
That's a good answer. That's a really good answer.
yeah, I mean, it's something I have to think about because, I got students, they're missing creativity. And it's like, I'm not like everyone, I'm like some of them, right? So like you say, there's different degrees, right? And one thing I'm really happy about my kids because I try to create curiosity with my kids way when they're young, but my kids do have a lot of creativity. And I remember one time, okay, I was on the river with my son, daughter, and I was using these binoculars to try to see rare birds that were coming by. Cause, in the spring and fall, the rare birds come by and you want to see them, right? So I couldn't, and I wanted to take a photo and, had the binoculars and then we had a little camera, right? And then I said, it's too bad we can't see. So my daughter grabbed the camera and she put it up to the binoculars and she took a photo. And I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing when you see it, right? That when creativity comes by and how people kind of take things and put them together in a different way that maybe had not had magic, right? I didn't think you could take a photo through the binoculars. I mean, who would even want to try? I see a lot of these types of things, right? And if you want to do drug discovery, if you want to start a company, if you want to teach, you have to have that creativity. I mean, you need it. That's the core, right?
You've been an entrepreneur. You've been an academic. You've worked in the private sector. You've touched a lot of projects and seen a lot of things, overcome a lot of obstacles. And I'm wondering if your definition of leadership has changed over time.
The answer is yes, but I don't know if I would use the word definition, right? Let's say the attributes of leadership has changed over time, right? Because I'd say yes, absolutely. But you got to remember, I started leadership when I was a kid because I couldn't go and play with friends. The only way I had friends is if they came and they worked with us. And then all of a sudden now, if you have a few people or cousins that would come from Quebec to come and work with us, right? And then I would be in charge of making sure that hay would get in the barn, or I had a project, and so I had to be leader at that age, right? That started then. And now what's happening is I think that leadership, the attributes of leadership is changing very, very much. Remember we talked earlier about what was like to work in Beringer Ingelheim. And I said, it's like 4 walls and you weren't going to get out of those 4 walls, right? It was very strict. So leadership had different attribute at that point. Then COVID happened and then people started working from home. Right. And now you have and then you have another generation that's very different than the generations that I grew up in. And so now they want very different things. And so now leadership has to change to be able to fit those situations. So I think that leadership is changing quite fast right now, right? Because and I think that it's becoming more challenging to be a leader now, because on one is you got to have a business, you have to have an income, you have to see the changes that are coming, but then people want to stay home and work too. And then how do you manage that? How do you deal with all that, right?
Yeah, that's a really good observation. I think you're right. The sense of or definition of leadership has gone from an authoritarian leader to a servant leader to a great degree. Yeah, circumstance has dictated a change. I got, again, because of all of the things that you've done, I got to ask this question. Do you prefer to still sit at the bench to do research, or is that something that, been there, done that, and your preference, like if all things being equal, you'd rather work in the business? Which one is it?
Okay, so I've always been a bench person. So that's just the way it's always been. Now, when I started the company, I was still a bench person. And it was only when I became a prof that I had to give that up. Being a prof, there's a lot of paperasse, a lot of paperwork to deal with. Like, for example, applying for grants, right? You apply for grants. Very few actually get accepted, but you still have to apply for the grants. You have to do all the paperwork. Even if you get them, then you have to do the paperwork for how things, and it's like, it's a ridiculous amount of paperwork, right? And so there's literally no time to be at a bench. Impossible. And so the professors that I know, they're not bench people, which is a loss, because the reason why you hire them is because they're scientists or high-level academics, and you want them to use that. But a lot of the energies are on non-academic things.
Right.
And so there's a loss. And now, so for me, I would like to be at the bench, but I can't afford to do that.
Right. No, that ship has sailed.
Yeah. But it's okay in a lot of ways, because, I'm thinking at a different level. I'm continuously thinking about, I'm not thinking about other companies, right?
Right.
I'm still thinking about the transfer of the expertise, and then also right now with all these changes that are happening to the biotech industry, I have to think at different types of things right now. And so I really can't deal with the bench anymore. And to tell you the truth, after that, you kind of lose it too. For example, when you're running an experiment, there's codes that you have to type in. I don't necessarily remember those codes anymore. I know what we want. I know where we want to go, right? But that's just the fact.
You're in a pretty high stress position. Anybody that's running a company, and I wonder what you do to unwind. How do you get rid of that tension?
Okay, I have a favorite thing. I like to kayak.
Okay.
Yeah. So it turns out that I don't kayak in the day. I'm working in the day. So the only opportunity is at night. So night kayaking.
Night kayaking. So you've got running lights on your bow and stern.
No, I bring a flashlight. Right?
Okay.
That has if it turns out at night, nobody's on the river. So you don't really need it.
Solitude, quiet.
You have to have it in case, right? That's for sure, right? But basically, the river becomes mine, and it's calm. And then, you still have a lot of wildlife that are around. And so really, there's nothing like night kayak.
I'd never heard someone say that. And now you've piqued my curiosity. Looking back on your life to date, what is it you're most proud of?
My kids. Yeah, I am proud of my kids, because it's like, you talked about creativity, right? I'm seeing the fruits of that, and it's starting, right? One is 20 years old, the other one's 22, and I'm starting to see their creativity coming out, and I see the fruits from a lot of those efforts. And I think that's kind of cool.
There's so many questions I want to ask, but I want to also be respectful of your time. We end all of our podcasts with the same question, which is this: what is the next great big thing on your horizons?
I think that, to be honest, my next great thing, I'm doing it. And for me, I'm in love with drug discovery, right? And so that's what I want to do. And that's what I'm doing. And so what I really want to do next, I want to start companies too. So I have recently started another company, and I want to start another one. And and I want to do something that really mixes academia and business. Okay, so what happens is that the government puts a lot of money into the universities, lots of money, right? And what do? The professors go and they say, oh, I've discovered this new protein for this particular virus or for this particular cancer disease. And then they try to publish it, and they always put the statement, oh, this is a brand new and great for drug discovery, right? Of course, they didn't do anything for drug discovery, but they did discover a potential target, right? And then it goes dormant. They don't know how to move it forward. And so what this newer company will do is take those discoveries for free and see if it's druggable. And then if it is druggable, then use the drug discovery network to see if people are interested, like biotechs are interested in it, because they discover the targets. They have all the technologies for that particular target. We look to see if it's druggable. If it's of interest for somebody downfield in the drug discovery regime, then now you can kind of walk these people through the drug discovery network along that path to move forward. And so make those links. And because right now, how do they make the links, right? So the Quebec government has created this company called Celis, and that's their job, is to take academic discoveries. But what they do is they take the cream of the top, and that's it. What do the rest of the people do? What are the rest of these other discoveries? And so I would think that would be highly interesting for governments, right? I would think.
Yeah.
Because now you're taking the discoveries that they've been doing and actually valorizing them, right, to move them forward. So that's what I want.
I so look forward to hearing more about that. Steven, thank you so much for this. It's been a treat speaking with you, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate the discussion. And I think, I don't know, I feel like I've made a friend.
Likewise. And I do look forward to meeting in person, and maybe we can drag Josh along as well.
Sounds good.
That was Steven LaPlante, who is the founder of NMX Research and Solutions in Laval, Quebec. If you'd like to learn more about the work Steven and his team do, you can find details at nmxresearch.com. You can also follow them on social at nmx_research. To find details about this podcast, please visit nextgreatbigideas.com. You can also follow us on social at NGBI Podcast and at NGBI Summit. You can follow me on social at Lab Occupier, and you can find more information about what I do when I'm not hosting podcasts at laboccupier.com and jim-wilson.ca. This episode of NGBideas was researched by Xenia Pinto and edited by No Limit Marketing. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email. My address is jwilson@leonard, that's LENNARD.com. Thanks very much for listening. See you next time.